All right, we are live, Gar. Welcome to the show, everybody. The show that does not have a name yet, because the name that we wanted to pick was taken. My name is Yasin Horansky. I'm the founder and CEO of Luniko and your host here for today. And I've helped digitally transform businesses of all shapes and sizes, from publicly traded multi-billion-dollar organizations to local nonprofits and everything in between. And just like you, I'm wondering where artificial intelligence and the whole disruptive technology that comes with it, that's been dominating headlines over the last 12 months, where it fits in and how. So that's why we've created this show, right? To bring on guests of all levels and all types of businesses to talk about AI and its business adoption, but strictly from a non technical lens. So that means we're going to be touching on topics of strategy, process, people. We'll get into the emotions, all of that side of thing. And if you're curious about AI and its business impacts and challenges, then this show is for you. So we're going to drop the jargon, the corporate jargon, as much as possible. We're going to keep the conversation as simple as we can. And welcome to episode 0, everybody. Now, as you guys know, we don't have a name yet. Thank you, Garlon, for putting that up there. Naming has never been our forte. So we're calling on anybody that thinks of a good name. If you can kind of help us name this show, right? Please drop us any suggestions on the email and LinkedIn, however you choose to do that. But not having a name isn't going to slow us down. And we're just going to get on with this until we can kind of figure out what that's going to look like. So episode 0 is going to be a little bit different than the rest of the episodes. Typically, I would have
episode 0.
This is episode 0. That's right. Yeah. Thank you, Gar. So it's going to be a little bit different than everybody. In future episodes, we'll have some guests that is not Luniko related, of course. But for today's episodes, we're going to talk about what the podcast is about, kind of why we started the podcast. I've got Garlon in here, who's my co-founder. Garlon's typically going to be in the background here, so you guys are not really going to see him as much. But today I am joined by him. He is my business partner for anything and everything, all things Luniko. He is an entrepreneur at heart, being in different types of industries and different roles. He's leveraged technology basically in all his startups, from a VR startup before VR was cool, I will say, to business intelligence, to using crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter to successfully launch 5 products, and to the latest venture in AI with myself here at Luniko. Now, innovation has always been a constant in Garlon's life, and so him and I share those similarities. And because of that, we've worked together on many different projects, on different capacities, various startups, and corporate jobs as well, since 2011, where we met working at an energy firm. As he was a co-op student, I was a summer student. So
yeah,
we're finally live, Gar.
I'm excited because we've been talking about doing this for about 3 months. So let's see how it goes.
That is true, right? So look, if you know Garlon and I think this is the best place to start, Gar. If you know Garlon and I, you know that we like to start with the why, right? We're big Simon Sinek fans. So we're going to talk about why we started the show from a personal standpoint and a professional standpoint. And then we'll just talk about our experience, kind of going through experiencing, understanding, and learning the intricacies of the different AI kind of models. Just so you can kind of get a little bit of insight into some of our journey there, right? So let's talk with why we started this show. And I will promise to stop talking here and focus on you here, Gar. But really, the start of it is this was kind of been a passion project that we've decided on and off between different years. Some years we're going to do it, some years we're not going to do it. We talked about doing it with a partner a couple of years ago. But really, we just love to talk to people. We love to connect. We love to learn. If you've ever seen me at a tech event, like you'll see, me trying to talk to as many people as possible. So we figured that this would be a good vehicle for that. We both grew up around technology, and it's really been, at the center of our world for quite a bit, both personally and professionally. And, Gar, why don't you tell us a little bit more about you and what this podcast is in it for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as you mentioned, I've always been interested in technology, right? Growing up, I would always get the newest cell phones. Before that, as a little kid, I was always get the newest Game Boys to play games and stuff. So when it came to having an opportunity to talk about AI, especially something that is so disruptive, something that is so, I mean, at least right now, super talked about, and especially with, you and I being in the business world, there's a lot of corporate impact from that sense. So having this podcast, being able to have conversations with people that are in that realm, crossed with how this disruptive technology might impact them on a day to day, I think is a fantastic opportunity to kind of just understand and dig into this unknown realm a little bit more together.
Right. And it's kind of like, AI, I mean, a lot of people are saying, and I think we feel under that same category, that it's going to be very disruptive, and it's going to be changing the way that we interact, both in the workplace, of course, right, with operational improvements and things like that, but also on a personal side, with, I don't know, man, just many different applications there, right? So it's cool because, when the last time something this revolutionary from a tech perspective happened, it was the internet. I was pretty young, right? I was pretty young. I didn't really understand like, I just grew up with the internet. But I do remember my dad, who was a database administrator in the 90s, right, working with computers. We always had kind of computers growing up. I love playing computer games, right? Game Boys 2 and whatnot. Strategy games were my thing when I was like, 6, 7, 8 years old. But I didn't really get as much computer time from my dad as I wanted, right? Like, which was good, right? Now looking back on it, my dad was, he was kind of fucking around with different things on the internet. He was building some leather keychains, and he started to build some websites. So he showed me like what he was doing there on the website, and I had no understanding of it, right? But I did end up building 2 websites that were
What were
basically
they?
cheat codes. It was
Oh,
StarCraft and Warcraft games back then, and it
video
was
game
cheat
cheat
codes.
codes. And you're
Yeah,
sharing that with everybody.
I was sharing the cheat codes with
That's
everybody.
great.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they were public, but actually
Yeah,
that's
they
not
were
true. You
public
had to buy magazines back then.
to
So
get
I
the
had a
cheat codes.
magazine of cheat codes.
Right.
Yeah. So I built a website around it and whatnot. I don't know what happened and kind of how it went after that. But I mean, really, technology, same as you, Gar, has always been a key part of my life from a personal perspective, even with my kids now. We
Mm,
talk about AI. They're growing up with AI. They really don't know anything different. For them, things like Siri is just a way to get answers to their questions. They're talking about Star Wars right now. They're really into that. So it's like, hey, who is Baby Yoda's father, and does he have a brother? So they'll ask Siri those kinds of questions. But we do a lot of things with Dolly, right, in
yeah.
terms of creating visuals and creating coloring pages, things like that they can do. And it's cool to see how they interact. Anything else you want to say on the personal side, Gar, for tech, or should we move on?
Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay, so let's talk about the professional side, right? Because obviously we're both entrepreneurs, right? We've been, involved in the management consultant space for a number of years in digital improvements, transformations, that sort of thing. AI really just dominated headlines in 2023, right?
Mm,
And I think it's going to continue to do so, right? I think that it's obviously going to be a big capability that organizations are going to look to try to leverage. And it doesn't matter what the technological revolution is, whether it's the internet or whether it's basic systems or AI that we're talking about now. The truth is that people will always be at the center of it, right? And they're going to be either the reason for its effective integration, or they're going to be the reason for its demise. And when we talk about things from a professional perspective, it's like we've been having a lot of conversations with various people and different stakeholders. What do you think? And what do you think is going to be good? What do you think is bullshit, right? Like, what do you think is more than hype? What do you think it does not get talked about? Just to really build our curiosity. And we tend to do that over a beer or a networking event or anything like that. And we thought
mm,
that, like, why have those conversations where nobody else can kind of see them except for us, right? They tend to be pretty dynamic. They tend to be interesting. Everybody has kind of different perspectives and the things that they think about, the fears or the risks or the challenges or the opportunities, that we just thought, like, let's just get everybody here together one by one. we can chat with them, we can hear their perspectives, and maybe different people will kind of learn from that, right?
Mm-hmm. For me, I think, obviously I won't get too much into it, but Luniko as a business, we're definitely dabbling in AI, and we're pivoting our business to integrate AI, not just for us, but for our clients. But what, for me, I thought that, again, going back to the love for technology, right? If I have an opportunity to marry my love for technology with also just business, what I get to do on a day to day, I mean, we spend 40 hours at work, if not more, a day, right? So if you can marry those two worlds together, it's a win-win in my books. And just, I know you briefly talked about it before, but coming straight out of university, I've had that opportunity to dabble in VR when VR was even cool. This was like when the first Oculus Rift came out. I had a little startup that, or I was a co-founder of a little startup that said, "Hey, there's this brand new technology out there. It's going to be the Wild West. There's so many different applications that could be done. What should we do?" And we went from an idea to an actual execution of creating that product and actually selling it to a couple customers. And so that was a really cool experience. Like, obviously there's a lot of learnings that I'm taking from that, but just kind of remembering how interesting and dynamic that work environment was. Like, hey, we're doing things that nobody's done before. And kind of coming back full circle, Luniko, this new version of it, or this new chapter of it, definitely feels like that for me. So same thing. I think even just in this short period of time where we started dabbling from a professional standpoint in AI, I've had to go through a few paradigm shifts, a few new ways of thinking about AI, because I wasn't like, bam, oh yeah, this is the next big thing. I was also caught in the, oh, this might just be hype. I'll dabble in it and kind of make my own opinions. And throughout that journey, I think I have a few things that might be interesting for me to share on this podcast. And, from a podcast standpoint, I think it will be cool for us to take a look in about a year, 2 years, or at regular frequencies to use this podcast as a bit of a journal. It'll be interesting to see, if we keep going 3, 4, 5 years down the line, going back to episode number 1, 2, 3, and be like, oh, this is what people were thinking. Think about how much AI has evolved since those conversations, right? So that's kind of why I'm doing this professionally, I think.
Yeah, that'll be cool to see, because like the internet, man, I don't think anybody back in 1995 when it was really picking up steam thought that you'd be able to pick up a cell phone and have McDonald's delivered to you in 15 minutes,
Yep,
right? 20
absolutely.
minutes at your door, right? Like it's crazy how much we've come. That is
Well,
cool.
yeah. I mean, think about all these new technologies. Whenever a new platform comes out or a new disruptive technology, it takes time for all the different permutations and ideas to come out of it. When you think about virtual reality, it's kind of the same thing, right? At first, everyone's like, oh, there's so many business applications, there's so many video game applications. But what's interesting about that is that that one didn't quite live up to the hype that it did, right? And obviously, AI, we're having this hype cycle, right? I think you can see it from the stocks. But what I believe is that there will be value generated from an AI standpoint, regardless of what the stock price is saying of AI companies, right? In the long run, there will be business value that's generated, and I really firmly believe that that's undeniable.
Yeah, I think so too, man. It's kind of like we see systems nowadays. It's not really a thing you do. It's just a core of your organizational DNA,
Yeah,
right?
just like the
Uh,
dot-com boom too, right? There was the big hype, and then it all crashed. But then in the longer run, you've got your Amazons, your Googles, your Netflixes, and stuff like that, right? But
from the ashes, they arose. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
exactly. That's a
the
great
ones
quote.
that the ones that made it, right? So
Yeah.
let's talk about let's hone in a little bit on large language models, and specifically ChatGPT, because ChatGPT was the catalyst, I think, for the hype last year, right? I mean, geez, just seeing the capability, what could be possible at the first beginning stages of it, right? And seeing
Mhm.
videos of, oh, in 30 seconds I created this website and this business and all this kind of stuff that kind of came up from it. That obviously a lot of it was not very good. Now that we kind of see it later down and the dust has settled, but
Mhm.
it was, and I think it's probably going to be a lot of people. It's either going to be ChatGPT or some sort of similar large language model variation that people are either exposed to soon, if they haven't already been exposed to it, or something like Copilot, right? Where their organization is going to be purchasing Copilot, or I think some people are already starting to get it as a preview without having to purchase it, right? So
Mhm.
you've gone through a lot of. Let's talk about your experience in AI, right? Because you're obviously a big tech advocate, but anytime there's new tech, you go through this like motion of your initial journey. So why don't we talk about what your journey was like, Gar, and maybe provide the audience with a little bit of context as to how that came to be.
Sure. Well, when we decided to do our business pivot, Yas came to me and said, "Hey, you ever heard of this thing called AI?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I have." He's like, "Well, I'm thinking of building a business around it, right?" And I was like, at that point, I hadn't really dabbled with ChatGPT too much. I think I had seen some videos and I went in there and I specifically remember um, my fiance is a vet and she had this really challenging case. And I said, "Hey, why don't we ask ChatGPT and see what ChatGPT could come up with?" And so we typed in all the parameters of the case, and ChatGPT kind of gave a generic answer saying, like, okay, it could be any of these things. From my perspective, I was like, oh, is this pretty good? From my fiance's perspective, it was like, well, it's lacking a few things. It's not bad, but it is, you know, in my professional opinion, there are some other things that it hasn't really brought up. So that was my kind of initial experience. And working with Yasin had to convince me a little bit about, hey, there really is something here. We should dig into this a bit more, right? And I think I definitely had my own personal skepticisms of AI as well, right? I think one of the mental traps that people can get caught in with AI is when you first hop into ChatGPT and ask it a question, you kind of go, oh, that question wasn't very good. But I think there was a bit of a mental gap or a jump that people had that I don't know if people talk about it much, but you know, ChatGPT, you kind of have to, um, or just AI in general, you kind of have to feed it certain things for it to give you the proper responses, right? For ChatGPT specifically, because that's the AI that everybody knows. Lots of people say, hey, give me a recipe for X, right? And it's a very basic recipe for things. And then you look at the recipe it gives you, and you're like, well, that doesn't look very good. It doesn't have very specific things, right? And yet we have given it a simple prompt and expected a perfect answer, right? When in reality, even if let's say I'm asking Gordon Ramsay for something, I probably would give him a lot more context on, hey, I'm looking for this type of recipe that can fit within this time constraint. Oh, I'm allergic to XYZ, so on and so forth. Can you give me a recipe for this? Right. And he probably would have, with his experience and understanding of cooking, give me something instead. So my mental flaw, I think, at first was to give it the simplest prompt and expecting the world from it. When in
To read your
reality,
mind, basically.
for it to read my mind, but even we expect so much of this technology. I think we are taking some of it for granted. But the truth is, or the reality of it is that you have to have a little bit of give and take. It's a conversation. It's about elaborating on what your initial idea is. And so that was one of the first mental traps that I had about, like, okay, I'm kind of skeptical about AI until I had that first paradigm shift of I actually need to give it more information. I can't give it a simple prompt and expect the best answer. And it should be treated as a back and forth, right? Now, my second paradigm shift was really assuming that AI wasn't going to produce anything good, right? It would help me get a lot of the legwork there, but it would still fall short for a lot of things. Now, the way that I kind of see it, um, or the best example of this was, I remember you specifically asking me, like, okay, well, why are you scraping information from this document manually, right? And I
I
said,
remember
well,
that. Yeah.
I can't. Well, I can't assume that Chat GPT would be able to scrape these different fields that I need perfectly, right? I'm sure it'll give me some flaws. And let alone I'm trying to scrape 50 documents, right? So you said, well, why don't we just try? And that was a turning moment for me because it was kind of like that the rule of, hey, innocent until proven guilty. I
Mm,
think from a change management standpoint, a lot of people are resistant to change. But the thing is, you know, the truth was, like, when you entered those documents, it actually did a really, really good job of scraping that information. I would say for that specific use case, it was like 95% accurate.
mhm.
And so that saved me a lot of time. And if I hadn't gone through and said, like, okay, fine, I'll try and I'll appease you just by throwing all these documents in there and not doing it manually, I would have still been doing it manually, right? I wouldn't have given the AI a chance, I
Yeah.
guess. So now I have this philosophy of, I'm just going to throw everything I can at this tool until it proves me wrong and it says, yeah, it's kind of, this is where the threshold of where I use ChatGPT, or this is where I use AI, and this is where I don't, right? I'm still on a personal journey to discover where that threshold is. And I'll, as new versions come out, I'll continue to push that boundary, so to speak.
Yeah. And as like different models come out and whatnot, they change. Sometimes they get better, sometimes they get worse. It's
Exactly.
really and I think that that's a paradigm shift that a lot of people need to be able to go through with not just AI but technology in general, right?
Mhm.
And like you have this technology that is very very capable and can do really amazing things, but you've got to know what it's good at and what it isn't, and how else will you know if you're not trying?
Yeah.
Right. And that was the conversation that we were having. That's like, you got to try. It's like, I
Yeah.
don't know if we can do it. It's like, I don't know if we can
Yeah.
read a business process flow and tell me, who the roles responsible of it are.
Yeah.
I, I don't know. Let's try it out. Like,
I
how else are
never
we going to
gave it
find
the
out?
benefit of the doubt, essentially, right? It's like if you're a teacher and you just assume your student can't do it, or if you're a parent, you just assume your kid can't do it, you're never going to let them try and do it, right?
Right.
What I want to see is, I want to see the AI fail, and I want to understand where it fails, why it fails, if I can, right? And
Yeah.
then, as a leader or someone that has tasks to do, I will know whether this person or this student is up for the job, right?
Yeah. And that learning piece and having an understanding.
Yeah.
um it's like why things work the way that they work, and where it was successful and where it wasn't successful,
Hmm.
because we've seen this many times, right? One person will do something, they'll get completely different results than the other person, and then one will just think like, oh, it's the tech's not working well. But
Hmm.
it's sometimes it is the tech's not quite there. It's obviously not perfect, it's got its challenges, but oftentimes we just don't know how to interact with it,
Hmm.
right? And the CEO of NVIDIA came out recently, right? And he basically said that the next generation of workers, they shouldn't be learning how to program. They shouldn't be learning how to code. Like, that thinking is kind of gone, right? Before it was like, you got to learn how to do that because systems are everything. And, you want to be able to operate within various systems and be efficient and effective there. Now it's
Hmm.
like, you got to understand how this technology works and what's a good way for you to use it. And I think about the Iron Man as an example, right? I don't know what it's called, like what uh, you know Marvel, right? Gar, what's
Yeah.
his AI called?
Jarvis.
Jarvis, right? There you go, Jarvis, right? Like, he basically he's just talking to it, he's doing things, and it's kind of,
Mhm.
he understands its strengths and its limitations and its weaknesses, and because he has such an amazing understanding, he's basically become one with tech.
Yeah.
Quite literally, I guess, as part of the movie, right? And I would challenge people to start to do that, right?
Yeah.
And I would challenge people to start to play around with it and see, can this be done or not? And if it can't be done, then you've learned that, okay, you know what, this is not an application that is good for AI well, it's not good for us to leverage AI to
Mhm.
use to effectively execute it. But then you're going to be surprised, and I have been surprised
Mhm.
many times with the things that it can do and that I can get better at it. And I think that generative AI has such a huge potential in the business world to do good and to also do some bad.
Yeah.
Um, because it isn't great at everything. And just like you said, hey, innocent till proven guilty, you've also got to look at it from the other way around, right? Like, you can't just assume that it's all good and that the quality is there, because it
Yeah.
provides you some very logical answers, and it sometimes makes shit up.
Yeah. I think that the role of the human, at least right now or in the near future, is that it the human almost evolves into a quality assurance type of role, right? Um, Speaking from personal experience, I've tried to get ChatGPT to build me code for certain things, and it gets it to about 80% of the way there, right? And then you put the code into, let's say, Power BI, I'm using DAX or whatever, Python, right? And Python comes back and spits back a bunch of errors. And where the human has to come in, and or sorry, let me backtrack for a second. I've used the tool or tell ChatGPT to say, hey, your code has returned this error. It will say, oh, sorry. Um, you're right. Let me fix that code for you. It gives me a new code, but I put it back in. Either new errors occur or the same error continues. And where the human's role shifts is that I don't have to do the heavy lifting for coding anymore. I have to become a very good debugger. I have to
Mm.
be very good at ensuring the quality of that code. So whether you learn to program still to understand how to debug those things, or alternatively, maybe another idea is to be very good at figuring out how to debug specific or common problems that the AI tool comes up with. So we're in a little bit of that transitionary period where AI can do a lot of the heavy lifting. You don't have to do things from scratch. It's going to make your ability to be more efficient, save you time at work, right?
Yeah, and
And
I think that, like, obviously quality assurance is a big component of it. But
mhm,
I would say that before quality assurance, because obviously quality assurance comes much later in the process, it's, you got to be able to guide it correctly. And I think that that's where the majority of
absolutely,
the people struggle right now. Like, it's a new thing, and I think that most people haven't really grasped the, like, a good enough understanding of what it is, let alone like how it functions and why it functions the way that it functions.
yeah,
That if you're not guiding it correctly and you're not structuring things well, and we won't get into too many details, right? But obviously, like, you've got to think about, how you lay out the instructions, the things you say, the things you don't say, when you say certain things, how often you say certain things, right? Like,
the
it's a very
capacity
powerful
of
tool to get.
your request, yeah,
Yeah, right.
okay,
There's so many different factors that you have to be able to consider. And it starts with guiding it. And if you guide it well from the first time, and let's say that you're coming up with this project that requires a whole bunch of different prompts, and it's a very complex thing to kind of build out. Sure, the quality assurance at the end of it is going to be important, but like, you need to guide it well from the beginning and guide it
mhm,
well throughout the process. And you've got to know where to put the human in and what role the human needs to play to make sure that you get something good at the end of it. Otherwise, it's just going to be garbage in, garbage out.
yeah,
And we've seen lots of stories in the news about that, right?
yeah. Have you heard
So,
of the question that helps people determine your work style, where it's like, hey, would you rather fight a horse-sized duck or fight 100 little duck-sized horses.
I
Right?
haven't heard this. No.
um, yeah, basically it's like, would you rather take one big task and just tackle the whole task, or chop up the little task into individual bits and then tackle every single one and kind of divide and conquer, right? I'm not sure if I got that analogy right, whatnot, but you get the point, right? Um, and what we've discovered, at least from my standpoint, is that this current state of these large language models is that it works well with these smaller series of prompts, that and having you as a human being figure out what those little questions are going to be to help direct and create what your end product with the language model will be.
Right.
So there
So
is a specific approach. Yeah.
let's move on to the psychology of it, right? Because one of the things that I know that you kind of went through, Gar, and you with your experience with it, was this feeling of guilt, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
want to talk us through that?
Yeah, sure. I think it won't just be me, and this really circles back to some potential resistance to using AI tools. I think some people, in essence, think it's like cheating because
Mm-mm.
the AI tool is doing so much of the heavy lifting for you and doing all the thinking. Well, you know, what am I good for if it's doing all this, right? Something that used to take me an hour now takes me, you know, 2 minutes. Am I still as valuable, right? Now, I want to bring up a story that one of our colleagues, Catherine, got to give her credit for the story brought up, but I think it's extremely relevant to this scenario, or this particular topic we're talking about. Is that in 1947, Betty Crocker, you're familiar with Betty Crocker, right?
The cakes, yeah.
The cakes and the different mixes that they make that you can buy in grocery stores. They essentially created this new product that was a cake mix, and all you had to do was just add water. They figured out how to dehydrate eggs. They figured out how to dehydrate the milk so that everything could be on a shelf. And really, you just needed the water to kind of combine everything, the baking powder or soda or whatnot. It's all in there. So, they thought that they hit it out of the park. For your typical busy homemaker, all they have to do is add water, put it in a pan, throw it in the oven, and bam, homemade cake, right? Don't have to buy eggs. You don't have to buy all these other ingredients and figure out the ratios. Like, man, it saves you so much time. But then what was interesting was that they had a really hard time convincing people to use the product, because people started to think, well, if I'm just adding water, you know, I feel like I'm not really doing the work. They brought in a bunch of psychologists to analyze and ask the homemakers or the people that would potentially buy this product, like, why aren't you buying the product? And that's what they found, that there's this element of guilt, right? They felt like there should have been more work that they were supposed to do. So it was really clever what they did. I think what they changed the box to say and changed their formula was to say, add eggs, add milk, so that the homemaker or whoever's buying the product felt like they had to do a little bit more, and then the sales just took off after that. So it's interesting to think that there's a bit of a human psychology standpoint to this as well, that there's this perception of, oh, I'm using this AI tool and it's just not going to be as good, or am I really, like, should I be spending more work and more of my time doing this work instead of getting AI to do all the heavy lifting, right? And I think that we need to take a step back and be like, okay, what is the task that I have at hand and what is my end deliverable? How can I use AI or whatever tool to help me either like do the job faster, and at the same time, me applying whatever I need to do to ensure that the quality is still there. So that's just kind of the interesting story about the guilt part, right? So I definitely went through that experience of like, I'm supposed to do all this research. I'm supposed to comb through all these reports to figure out X, Y, and Z. If I just ask ChatGPT, I'm sure it's going to miss the X in the X, Y, and Z, right? So, but you just don't know until you ask. And then once it does spit something out for you, my brain shifts to thinking, okay, how is there anything missing here? Do I need to go and ask it more questions or just supplement it, right?
Right.
But
And it's funny because decades later, you see all these bakeries that are basically just, creating the products off of Betty Crocker, right? Putting some decoration on top and selling it as their own, right? Like
yeah.
it's interesting to see how perception has changed so much. I didn't realize that people were so hesitant about it before. That's interesting, man.
Imagine, yeah, you could have Betty Crockers that are just add water. It could have been simpler. But now we have to add egg and water. Or sorry, egg and milk just because of a perception thing.
That's cool, man. So look, we are about almost 40 minutes into this, right? What do you think about just AI in general, Gar? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? And what would you say to the listeners here who are thinking about like AI and how what would be a good way for them to start to understand it or continue to understand it a little bit better?
I think that if you're relying on it, not just for entertainment purposes, you should be skeptical because it's kind of your name on the line at the end of the day for whatever work product you're delivering. But, you know, challenge your original thought of like, oh, everything has to be done by myself. Use these tools that are available for you to see how it can change your workflow, right? It could be, I know for me specifically, I work better with a draft one that someone on our team may have brought up. And I'm really good at building on that, right? That's why you and I work so well together because you come up with first draft and I kind of give it the polish, right? If you will. So if you're relying on it, be skeptical, but at the same time, push those boundaries. Again, innocent until proven guilty. Assume that AI can do it until it tells you that it can't.
But don't assume so much that you don't check the
That you
quality
don't
of
check your work.
get yourself
Exactly.
in trouble,
Be
right? Like that.
skeptical still. Yeah.
Right. That's good, man. Good advice, Gar. I think I hope our listeners take on that. So, guys, everybody, thank you so much for listening. If you stayed here till the end of the show, we're very excited about it. We've got a lot of exciting guests that we'll be having on from different paths of life, different careers, different industries, different roles, different levels of the hierarchy, and everything else in there, right? And I think it's going to be very interesting to see different inputs. The next episode that we will have, it's going to be an IT director of a biotech company that's based out of California, but he has spent the majority of his career in aerospace and aviation manufacturing. So it's going to be interesting to kind of hear from his perspective, right? Where does he see manufacturing going? Where does he see tech going? He started his career in operations before moving into the more IT and digital transformational kind of world, right? So he's got that perspective of process and technology and kind of working together. So it'll be interesting to see what his input is on some of these topics. We'll be a lot more structured, right, in terms of some of the questions we might want to ask him about there. We're always looking for feedback, right? This is episode 0. We're always looking to kind of improve as well. If you've got any suggestions, any thoughts, any things you want us to talk about, anybody that you think should be on the show or we should chat with, please let us know, right? Reach out to me on LinkedIn or Garlon or LinkedIn, right? Or send me an
Or
email.
comment
Yeah.
on wherever this video is posted.
Yeah. Comment whatever you want there, right? Let us know. And we still need a name, right? As you guys can see here, placeholder for a cool podcast name, right? So give us a cool podcast name. We're looking for them. We're not very good at naming things. Remember that. So please help us out on that. We're going to be publishing this every couple of weeks. 2 to 3 weeks is kind of what we're aiming for each of the episodes. Follow us on LinkedIn to get more information on when the next episode is going to be. So Gar, thanks a lot for being on the show, man. I think we'll bring you back every now and then to kind of see. I like that whole thing that you're talking about, kind of like documenting things and how things evolve. I think it'll be cool to see later on, like, hey, some of the things that we were talking about, whether they came to life or they didn't come to life or whatnot, man. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, guys. See you next time.
See ya.